I'd like to welcome everyone to the RUMI Forum and for this special event here in November. Especially want to welcome our online audience who'll be watching, and this will be streamed and archived online. My name is Wayne Lavender. I'm a United Methodist pastor and a recent PhD graduate from George Mason University School of Public Policy. My professor and chair of my dissertation committee was Dr. Mark Rozell, who's our speaker today. Professor Rozell will be speaking on the recent elections. His talk is titled Retrospective on the 2010 U.S. Midterm Elections. After he shares some comments and thoughts with us, he and I will have a little discussion. I'll ask him some questions, and then we'll open up to the audience for some questions as well. And we should be somewhere in a range of 30 to 40 minutes. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to my professor, Dr. Mark Rozell.
Great. Thank you, Wayne, and thank you to the RUMI Forum for sponsoring this event. I wanted to just give a little bit of an overview of what happened on Election Day in 2010 and talk about the implications of this election as the United States tries to forge some solutions to a variety of policy problems that are plaguing the country and that had a big impact on the perceptions of voters in this election cycle. Looking at some of the data from this election, it's quite clear that the major factor in people's voting decision was perceptions about the state of the economy and general discontent with the overall direction of the country and direction of various public policies by the Obama administration. I found it very, very telling that in the post-election surveys, in the exit polls, about 2/3 of the voters had said that the United States is moving on the wrong track. There's a common polling question that's used in exit polls asking the voters whether the United States is on the right track, that is policy and the economy are moving in the correct direction, or whether the country is going on the wrong track. About 2/3 of the voters said the country is on the wrong track right now, and 75% of those people voted Republican. So the election was very much a reaction against not only certain policies of the Obama administration, but more so a reaction against the general condition of the country that many people perceive is on the wrong track right now. And typically what happens in U.S. elections, of course, is that the party in power, whether fair or not, gets to blame. Going back to the most recent midterm election cycle, 2006, about 60% of the voters said the country was on the wrong track at that time. And yet again, about 3/4 of those voters voted for the party out of power, that is, voted Democrat. So we see that in this election cycle, about 3/4 of the people who said the country is on the wrong track voted Republican, but 4 years ago it was the opposite. About 3/4 of the people who said the country is on the wrong track voted Democrat. So we don't really have a discernible pattern here of the electorate moving in the direction of favoring one political party or the other. And in fact, with the 2010 election results, we've now had 3 consecutive election cycles, 2006, 2008, and 2010, in which the voters largely reacted against the party that is in power in the White House. So I think we're in a very sort of destabilizing period in American electoral politics right now, where there's no clear pattern of the voters expressing a preference in the direction of one political party or the other, but rather the public is anxious about the state of the economy, dissatisfied with the policies that are coming out of Washington, D.C., and reacting negatively to whoever happens to be in power at a particular point in time. So we're seeing consecutive election cycles where voters are making a statement against the majority party. And that suggests to me, of course, that although the Republicans won a historic victory, really, the number of seats that they picked up in the House of Representatives, at least 60, the largest since the 1930s, picking up 6 Senate seats and several hundred seats to state legislatures all over the country, as well as a large number of governorships, is a cause for celebration for Republicans on the one hand, but it's also a cause for caution, I think. If you look at the exit polling data once again, it becomes clear that the voters were not expressing a positive preference for the Republican Party and its policies, and in fact, equal percentages of Americans said that they have a negative view of the Republicans as have a negative view of the Democratic Party. Just over 1/2 the public was saying that it has a negative view of each of the two major political parties. So the Republicans were beneficiaries, I think, of an anti-incumbency wave, of a reaction against the incumbent party in power, the Democrats. But given the relatively unstable situation in the electorate right now and concern about the general direction of the country, the economy especially, it's not really clear that the Republicans have a success that they can necessarily build upon for the 2012 elections. In other words, the Republicans now, with having majority in the House of Representatives, own some responsibility for the direction of public policy over the next 2 years, and they will to some extent be held to account by this country if there is gridlock over the next 2 years. So many observers are saying that the principal effect of the 2010 elections is that there will be policy gridlock in Washington, D.C., with the Democrats controlling the White House and the Senate and the Republicans controlling the House of Representatives. It appears logically that it will be very difficult for the different players in Washington to get together and forge common agreement. But I think the voters have shown that they can take their anger out on who's ever in power at any point in time. And so the Republicans will be vulnerable in 2012, those who won election in this cycle, for example, just as the Democrats who won elections in 2008, many of them lost after one election cycle, again because of the voter reaction to the general state of the economy and the direction of the country more generally. Looking at some of the other significant findings in the exit poll data, the Republicans enjoyed a huge enthusiasm gap in the electorate this time, meaning that the people who turned out and voted Republican felt strongly about their vote, whereas people who turned out and voted Democrat did not have as strong an enthusiasm about their voting decision. The problem for the Democrats in this election cycle, more so though, was that large numbers of Democratic-leaning voters simply decided not to vote this year. The Republican portion of the electorate was way up, and the conservative portion of the electorate was about 1/3 higher than it had been in the most recent midterm election cycle, 2006. So again, the percentage of people who called themselves conservatives voting this time around was way, way up. So the Republicans did a good job of mobilizing their core constituencies in this election cycle, but the Democrats simply were not able to effectively mobilize their core constituency. The other factor that had a huge impact on the elections this year was the independent vote. America is, in a way, a 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 country. About 1/3 identifying Democrat, 1/3 Republican, and about 1/3 identifying independent. The people who are Democrats voted overwhelmingly Democrat. The people who are Republicans voted overwhelmingly Republican in this election, and that's usually a given. But the independent voters went heavily Republican this time. And I think one of the most fascinating statistics coming out of this election cycle is that the Democrats received only 39% of the independent vote in 2010, but the Republicans received only 39% of the independent voters in 2006. So from one midterm election cycle to the next, there has been a huge flip by independent voters. And they really are the swing voters in American politics right now. Elections are all about mobilizing the base, but also convincing the independent voters, those who can move from one political party to the other very easily, from one election cycle to the next, that this or that political party is the right place to be in this election cycle. But again, looking at the exit polling data, the independent voters were really not expressing a positive preference for the Republican Party and its agenda. The independent voters were expressing a negative sentiment about current policy coming out of Washington and about the Democratic Party. The Republicans gained strength among almost every demographic in this election cycle. The electorate overall, compared to 2006 and 2008, was much more white, much more conservative, much older. Again, the demographic groups that tend to vote Republican were turning out much more than the coalition of minorities and other voters who identify strongly with the Democratic Party, who did not turn out in this election cycle. The youth vote was way, way down. President Obama when he was candidate Obama in 2008, did a remarkable job in mobilizing constituencies who normally have relatively low turnout rates in American elections. And that included the youth vote, which has been notoriously the hardest to mobilize in modern American elections. Well, the youth vote was way, way down in this election cycle. So some of the core constituencies that Obama was successful in mobilizing in 2008 simply did not show up in 2010. And we could talk about some of the reasons why that happened, but I think a lot of it just has to do with the economic dislocations of various populations in America. We're looking at, for example, around 10% unemployment rate nationally, but that rate is much, much higher among younger people. And so they are more likely to be now the disaffected individuals who chose not to show up in this election cycle. There have been some comments by Republican leaders that it's important that they be modest about the interpretation of this election, that they be very cautious about the role that they play over the next 2 years. And I think that is a positive thing that these Republican leaders, Senator Mitch McConnell, the Senate leader, for example, has expressed this viewpoint that it's very important for the Republicans not to appear that they're bragging and not to, as he said, misread the mandate. And I'll close with this point because I think it's very important. Victors in American elections oftentimes believe that the election was a positive affirmation for themselves and for the policies that they campaigned on in the election. But the reality is we have many issues but only one vote in an American election. A voter is not giving an affirmation to every single policy position of the candidate he or she is voting for. There are a variety of reasons as to why people vote for one candidate over the other. In this election cycle, I think voters were making more of a negative retrospective judgment about the leadership of the Obama administration and of the Democratic Party than they were making a positive affirmation of the Republicans and their policies. The best analogy that I could think of is the mid-1990s period when the Republicans back in 1994, remember, had achieved their historic success in taking control of the House of Representatives after the Democrats had held the majority for 4 decades continuously. And the Republicans behaved at that point as though they were given a positive mandate by the American people. Once they tried to push very hard on their very conservative agenda items, they started to lose the support of the American people, and Bill Clinton's stature started to rise. People forget this, but many had dismissed Bill Clinton as a one-term president who simply could not stand for re-election in 1996 because of the strong reaction against his administration and the Democrats in 1994. And we're hearing some of that analysis right now about Barack Obama. Should he step aside? Should he not run in 2012? Do these election results portend that he is so weakened that there is no chance that he can stage a political comeback? Well, look what Bill Clinton was able to do in the mid-1990s. But in part, that was because I think the Republicans pushed too hard on some of their agenda items. They misread the mandate from the '94 election. And I think the Senate leader and the new Speaker of the House have both indicated that it's very important that the Republicans not misread the mandate this time, and that they try to push their agenda much more cautiously, and hopefully try to find some areas of agreement with Democrats in the Senate and a Democratic administration to try to do the work of governing this country over the next 2 years. So I'll stop there.
Politics. And I did have the opportunity to work on Election Day at the Centerville High School and heard a number of racist comments. In addition to that, I've been traveling throughout the state of Virginia and heard people tell me that they did not vote for Obama back in 2008. They voted Democratic because they would not vote for a person of color. So I'm just asking you if you could reflect for a few moments on what you think the state of race is in our country right now and how it perhaps influenced this election.
Right, right. And this is one of the harder questions to answer because those of us who rely upon statistical data to analyze results from election have a very difficult time getting at some of the really core contentious issues where voters are not willing to admit their real motivations for voting for or against a candidate. So understandably, very few voters will admit that race was a factor in their voting decision when approached by exit pollsters. They will project some other reason because they at least understand, even though they may have a racialist motivation, it's not generally acceptable to express that openly. Yeah, I am sure that there is an undercurrent of racial motivation that motivated some voters in the electorate. How much of the electorate was that? I don't know. Anecdotally, you said you came across some people who are willing to actually express that openly, and I'm sure that's out there. But I would always caution that Barack Obama was elected in 2008, and I remember even back in 1996 when General Colin Powell decided not to run for the presidency, a lot of Americans were very, very sad about that. And I remember lecturing to some groups back in the 1990s saying, just imagine what a big change this is in American politics and culture, that much of the country is in mourning over the fact that a black man decided not to run for the presidency. It really showcases just how much change has taken place over the course of my lifetime, where in my youth that perhaps was inconceivable that that could be the case. And yet in the 1990s, people still thought maybe it was inconceivable that in our lifetimes an African American could be elected to the presidency, but it did happen. And so I think that signifies that there has been enormous progress, enormous change in American politics. But it would be folly to suggest that Barack Obama's election simply ended racial
racism.
Politics in America. That would simply not be accurate.
Okay. And the next comment I'd have is that we talked about this election focusing around the economy. And of course, we're in the Great Recession now, 2 years into the Great Recession. Although officially over, it still is not over by most Americans. The 2006 midterm election seemed to hinge a lot on the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq.
Right.
Those two wars sort of dropped off the map in terms of this election. But the cost of those wars has now exceeded $1 trillion of actual spent money, and long-term costs we're now projecting at $3 to $4 trillion.
Yeah.
Is there a connection between the cost of those wars and the price we're paying and the economy and these votes? Why did those wars sort of drop off the map as an electoral issue this time?
Yeah, it is a curiosity about American elections that they are so intensely focused most of the time on parochial domestic issues. And nothing drives American elections more than the state of the economy, especially during bad economic times.
It's the economy, stupid.
As Bill Clinton's advisor said, it's the economy, stupid.
Yeah.
That's what American politics are all about, that you have to appeal to American voters on the basis of primarily economic issues. Economic recovery, jobs. We have relatively high unemployment in the United States right now, huge budget deficits, and there's a great deal of anxiety in the country right now over the economic future of the country. And so the exit polling data showed that the state of the economy, government spending were the principal motivating factors in people's voting decisions, and that the wars in the Middle East actually were a motivating factor for only a tiny percentage of the public. But the premise of your question is absolutely right. There is a connection between, of course, American policies abroad, our spending on these big wars, 2 wars right now, and the state of the and the government deficits and the state of the economy more generally, absolutely. But I don't think the average voter is making that connection so clearly. I think people in general, and this has been proven one election cycle after the next, will react against the incumbent party in power during bad economic times. And it's not as though the public is doing some kind of deep economic analysis as to how did we get to this situation, how many years did it take to get here, what role did the prior administration play, the policies of the former Bush administration, for example. What Americans know is that right now there is a president in the Oval Office. His name is Barack Obama. He's a Democrat. Americans don't like the way the economy is going. They're not expressing approval with current public policies, and they react against those at the voting booth. And it's just that simple.
The anti-incumbency mode you spoke about. And finally, the last question I'll have is, we're here to talk about the 2010 election, but I want to project forward and see if you put on your, look into the future a little bit. People have said that maybe the best thing for Barack Obama would be to have a Republican-controlled Congress, or at least House, because it gives them a foil and it gives them someone to work against.
Yeah.
Could you project ahead? And you mentioned the possibility of gridlock for the next 2 years, and I think we've all anticipated that. But what will happen the next couple of years, and maybe a quick foreview of what will happen in 2012?
Yeah, yeah. Put on my prediction hat here and see how we can project into the future.
Ball, you know?
That's right. So, I think that's the most important question right now for the country. How do the Republicans in the House of Representatives and the Democrats who lead the Senate and a Democratic administration work together over the next 2 years? Because, as I pointed out, the voters right now are in a pretty angry mood about the state of the economy, the direction of public policy. They're mad at both political parties, and they want solutions to problems, and they don't really care if those solutions come from Democrats or from Republicans. They just want the circumstances to get better. And so the public is going to expect that the White House and the Congress find some way to work together constructively in order to deal with some of the economic dislocations going on right now.
First of all, I would like to appreciate for your presentation. So it was really rich, and especially your exit poll results about the 39%. This is a really striking example how people react, like the 1/3, and also the youth contribution. As a matter of fact, I was listening to NPR right after the election day. So one young man said, I didn't want to vote for the person I hated the least.
Wow.
So
yes.
That was really important for my point. I have two questions. The first, the Speaker Pelosi, elected yesterday for a minority leader. So what do you think about her role for the new Congress? And the second role about the foreign policy change for U.S. Overall with the Republicans' control in the House.
Okay.
So how would you elaborate on that?
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for your questions. And regarding Speaker Pelosi, soon to be former Speaker Nancy Pelosi, that is, I imagine it would have been more helpful to the Democratic Party if they had turned to newer leadership after the thorough repudiation that they received in these midterm elections. In part, I would also say it's unfair to Speaker Pelosi because I don't think she's personally responsible for the drubbing that the Democrats took in this election cycle. Even though the Republicans did an effective job of vilifying her and making her a prominent feature in this election cycle. But on the other hand, she really was a very effective speaker during the first 2 years of the Obama administration. She pulled together that coalition in the House of Representatives for the health care reform bill after it looked like it would be impossible to pass that bill. She was a very effective leader on a number of agenda items in the House of Representatives and was, I think, a major factor in a number of the policy successes of the first 2 years of the Obama administration. So making her pay the ultimate price by stepping aside probably would not have been fair to her. But on the other hand, I don't think it's all about her personally. I think it's more from the perspective of the Democrats about their ability to change their image and get back those voters they lost, especially the independent voters. And having new faces, new leadership, I think would have helped with the party's image significantly. So from a strictly political standpoint, I don't think it was the best thing for the Democrats for her to continue in that role. Your question on foreign policy, President Obama, immediately after the election, as you know, made his trip to South and East Asia, his trade mission, where many observers said he was not successful in achieving some of the agreements that he had hoped to achieve, for example, the free trade agreement with Korea, among others. And many observers suggested that it was his newly weakened position as an American president, now a weakened position vis-a-vis the rest of the world because of the repudiation he and his party received in the midterm elections, that make it more difficult for him to be seen throughout the world as a formidable leader. Because I think so many observers are writing off this president as inevitably going to be a one-term president, and that he is in the status of effectively a lame duck presidency right now, it makes him appear as a weaker figure abroad. And I think that's going to make it more difficult for him to exert influence on behalf of the United States around the world. On the other hand, again, the political situation could change significantly. His stature could rise if the economy starts to do better and people feel more positive about the state of the economy and the president's leadership. And also, oftentimes when presidents receive what they believe to be a repudiation at the polls in a midterm election, they start to recharge themselves by traveling outside the United States. They start spending much more time abroad. The reality is, in the complicated system of separated powers in the United States, it is much harder for presidents to lead on domestic policy than it is for them to lead on foreign policy. There is much more constitutional leeway and independent powers in the hands of presidents when they're acting in areas of foreign policy and national security than there is in trying to forge consensus on domestic policies in the United States. So it would not be surprising if the president were to start emphasizing more foreign policy initiatives and doing more foreign travel over the next 2 years.
Foreign policy, especially for the Republicans,
yes.
Contribution. So,
okay.
Do you see a dramatic change, especially for the hot button issues like Iraq, Iran, and Afghanistan?
Right. Example is you're suggesting perhaps a stronger U.S. position against Iran. I don't think the Obama administration is going to act on the basis of what the Republicans say his administration should be doing. I think the president is still going to focus his policies on what he believes is right for this country, and he's got a very different view, I think, than the Republicans on a number of foreign policy issues. On the other hand, you asked about Afghanistan. Here's an individual who campaigned in 2008 saying that the war was a mistake. He did not support it when he was in the Senate. But once he became the president, he was in the position of managing two big wars that were not of his own choosing. And although many voters in 2008, I believe, had hoped that Barack Obama would effect a major change in U.S. policies in the Middle East, and particularly with regard to the wars, changing policy has not proved to be that easy for this administration. And I think that explains some of the discontent with the core constituencies of the Democratic Party, by the way. What did the president do? He increased the troop surge. He put more troops into Afghanistan. He increased the American role there. So for those who are hoping for a pullback of an American presence, it's been a disappointment. And you know, I think, quite frankly, in so many policy areas, the presidency has proved to be very, very difficult. More so than I think this individual as a candidate in 2008 could have understood. He issued an executive order saying close Guantanamo Bay within 1 year. Well, he hasn't been able to achieve that, and there's no end date in sight, it seems, right now. So a lot of not just the domestic but foreign policy questions have turned out to be a lot more complicated for this president. And I think it's very important to point out that although Americans elect presidents hoping for, as Barack Obama promised, change, the reality is presidents don't come in with a clean slate and the ability to make a policy agenda of their own choosing. They have an agenda put on their desks from day one that's created by their predecessors. And they have to manage policy situations that were created in the past. And I think that's been the dilemma for the Obama presidency, that this is a president who promised significant change, including in foreign policy and with regard to the wars in the Middle East. But we've seen a lot more continuity than change from his administration.
Good, so both complicated situation and a learning curve.
That's right.
We have a question way in the back, right?
Two questions. One is statistical. The media alludes to the Republican capturing at least 60 more votes, representatives in the House, but they don't give you the exact number. Do you have the latest numbers on how many Republicans, Democrats actually
Yeah.
was elected in both the House and the Senate. My question on economic policy, you mentioned that's a real thing that we need to pay attention to, and obviously that's correct. What are the prospects for for renewal of the tax cuts? Everybody's talking about it, and
Right.
also the bipartisan commission that the White House appointed. The leaders of the commission already issued recommendations. Other members, dissenting members, have their own views. What are the prospects of this commission actually issuing a set of recommendations that will likely be adopted? Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your questions. On the first question, right now, the Republicans have, after this election cycle, when the new Congress is seated, that is, 239 out of 435 in the House. There's 196 Democrats. So the Republicans, as of now, have picked up 60 seats in the House of Representatives. I say as of now because there's still 6 races that have not officially been determined because of continuing counts of absentee ballots and recounts, given that those 6 races were extraordinarily close. So the Republicans could pick up as many as 66 or as few, and I'm using the word few only because that's the range, as few as 60. For the Senate, the Republicans picked up 6 seats, so they will have 47 in the Senate, and the Democrats will still have a majority of 53 there. So it was a historic swing, the number of seats that...
including the Alaska?
This is including the Alaska Senate race, which has gone to an independent, who I'm going to count as a Republican. Since,
no change, really.
Yeah, so it's really a no change. And that's an extraordinary race because you had a candidate who won as a write-in candidate, which is very, very hard to do. Almost never happens in American politics at all. Your second question was on the continuation of the Bush-era tax cuts. I believe the tax cuts will be continued. The big debate right now is whether the tax cuts are only for people below, for example, $250,000 incomes, or whether the tax cuts will be continued for all persons, including the very wealthy. And that's the debate right now between the Democrats and Republicans, is whether the very wealthy should not receive the benefit of the continuation of the Bush-era tax cut. And then your third question was on the commission dealing with the government debt and reform proposals. The commission that has its 2 directors, at least its 2 chairs, the full commission hasn't voted, recommended that the United States raise the retirement age, that there be a number of other significant reforms that would have a big impact on the current government debt. Remind me some of the other...
Well, they had a $100 billion cut from defense.
Yes.
They had cut from education department, other Social Security savings.
Yes.
I think lack of cost of increase for the next coming years.
Mm-hmm. All extremely
the tax structure
unpopular.
was going to be changed dramatically in terms of elimination of mortgage.
Right, elimination of mortgage deduction for people with mortgages over $500,000 and for second homes.
Right, but a lowering of the highest tax rate to like a 21%.
Right. Yeah, so
the elimination of some of the deductions.
Right. So the proposal would eliminate some of the so-called loopholes in the tax system that give benefits, targeted benefits to various Americans, including the mortgage interest deduction for people with mortgages over, I believe, $500,000. And then a lowering of the tax rates to simplify the tax code. I think the problem is that there are too many entrenched interests in American politics that have organized around various tax benefits that these groups have benefited from over the years. And it's going to be politically extremely difficult to mobilize the kind of political support that's needed to enact these kinds of reforms. Raising the retirement age, I believe the proposal is raising the retirement age to 69 years of age. You can imagine a lot of Americans who work in hard labor, blue collar jobs, right? Making them work at digging ditches till 69 years of old, a lot of people think it's just not a very good idea. And of course, the difficulty in our system, as in any other, is that once certain benefits are conferred upon groups of citizens, it's hard to pull them back. It's hard to reduce benefits politically. So Americans are used to the fact that they can retire at a certain age, they can retire with a certain level of benefits, that they will get certain benefits increases. And I think what these commission chairs are saying, this cannot be sustained over the long term economically. Some significant changes have to be made. And personally, I applaud them for putting those controversial positions out there and for getting a debate going about how the United States should deal with its government debt problems and whether we're trying to confer too many benefits with, by the standards of most Western democracies, relatively low taxes. And continue on this particular course of path economically and remain economically competitive in the world. I think the chairs of the commission understand that this is not sustainable over the long run, but the problem is politically trying to build support for ideas that will reduce benefits for certain groups of Americans and cause some economic pain for some others in the short term.
I want to follow up for you on the second question you asked on the tax cuts, the Bush tax cuts running out. If I heard the question right, it wasn't just to review them, and I think we all believe that the 98% of the taxes will be renewed.
Right.
The million-dollar question, and to put on your crystal ball again, is will the Democratic-controlled Congress, the lame duck Congress now, continue the tax extensions for the very rich?
Right.
That's sort of the million-dollar question, and of course we don't know, but
right.
What's your sense of which way they're leaning now?
Right. It almost literally is the million-dollar question if you think about it, because what we're really talking about here, and it's quite interesting to me that we could have such a contentious debate over this, whether to continue the tax cuts for essentially the very, very wealthiest Americans. We cannot even develop a political consensus in this country, even among the Democratic Party, whether a tax cut should expire for people who earn an extraordinary amount of money. And I think part of it is that the Democrats right now, feeling the effects of the midterm elections, don't want to be characterized as the political party of tax increases. And that's making it more difficult, I think, for those who believe that the tax cuts should expire for people who are millionaires or the top 1 or 2% of the income earning profession. To make that case, it's harder and harder to make that case because the Republicans, I think, did a very good job in the 2010 election cycle of characterizing the Obama administration and the Democrats as in favor of increasing everybody's taxes,
yes.
Which factually was not true.
Right.
I was citing a lot of the exit polling data, and perhaps one of the more discouraging things in going through the data is that a majority of Americans said in polls that they believed that the country had an income tax increase during the Obama years, and the opposite is true. That is just factually wrong. But the political conversation in the country gravitated so much to the issues of government spending and whether President Obama was pushing too many expensive programs that many Americans took from that
their taxes were going up.
Their taxes were going up, but that simply did not happen. And in fact, people's taxes actually went down. 95%
of Americans got tax cuts.
That's right.
Under the Obama administration. I think only 8% recognized they got tax cuts.
Yeah.
So yes. Yeah, right here.
Yeah, I don't think you mentioned anything about the Tea Party
right.
or Sarah Palin. Do you think the Tea Party has proved it will be a viable party, or will it be only a one-shot party? And will Sarah Palin actually be a sort of a kingmaker, have a tremendous influence on the American political system?
Yeah.
And one other thing, the election was only really something against the Democrats. The Republicans didn't put forth any specific proposals, just general proposals. They're going to do away with the deficit. But the one thing that seemed to sort of gather them adherents was their opposition to the health plan. If anything sank the Democrats, probably was the health plan. How Republicans claim that they're going to somehow do away with the health plan. Do you think there anything they can do to in any way change the health plan law as it exists today?
Yeah. On the latter question first, President Obama still has that veto pen. So
and the votes in the Senate.
And he has the votes in the Senate too. So even if the Republicans in the House of Representatives push an agenda that would include repealing some of the health care reform package or trying to repeal all of it perhaps, it's not going to get through the Senate, and anything that the president objects to that gets through both houses, he can veto. So I think the health care reform is safe for at least the next 2 years. There are some Republicans, and Sarah Palin would be among them, who have said that they would favor a complete repeal of the health care reform initiative. So it's going to take a Republican president and Republican majorities in both houses of Congress after 2012 for that possibly to happen. But looking at the exit polling data just quickly once again, because I think this is very instructive, just on this question alone, you're right, that was a big factor in these elections. 48% of the country, almost half, said we should repeal health care reform. But interestingly, 47%, almost the same amount, said either preserve the health care reform or expand it. So the country is actually divided. Now, the intensity was more on the opposition side than on the preserve or expand it side of the equation. It was the people answering in this poll, get rid of health care reform, who were showing up on election day. And it was the pro-Obama people and those who favored the health care reform plan who were more likely not to participate in voting in 2010. But nonetheless, those data suggest that we still have a very divided public out there, even though the country voted overwhelmingly Republican. I'll give one other example from the exit polling data. Whether the government should try to reduce the deficit. 39% said that should be the #1 priority of the government right now, reducing the federal government deficit. 37%, almost an equal percentage, said the top priority of our government should be spending more money to create jobs. So even on the issue of government debt, there is no consensus. Again, it was one group that was much more intense and showed up in larger numbers at the polls and had a bigger impact. But overall, the country is very divided on these policy issues. You asked about the Tea Party, and I'm glad you asked because I had intended to mention them in my opening comments and I failed to do so. The Tea Party should always be written with lowercase because it's not an official political party, it's not an official organization, it's not analogous to the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. And I think it's very important to point out that the Tea Party is a movement. It's a grassroots movement that grew and evolved during uniquely this election cycle that had a big impact on mobilizing conservative voters at the grassroots to get energized in this election cycle. And the Tea Party movement, I think, was very effective in helping to mobilize the conservative base that turned out and, of course, mostly voted Republican. But I don't think we should overstate the importance of the Tea Party and its effects on this election because I think it was really a mixed record for the Tea Party. A majority of the country in the exit polls said that the presence of the Tea Party was not a factor at all in their voting decision. About 40% of the country said the Tea Party was a factor in their voting decision. And that group was split almost half saying they were in favor and about half saying they're opposed to the Tea Party. So although the Tea Party has attracted an enormous amount of attention in this election from the mass media, I think their overall impact has been somewhat overstated. Now, what is their long-term effect on American politics, you asked? It's hard to say. I think the greatest impact that the Tea Party had actually was within Republican Party politics. That is, The Tea Party was very effective in mobilizing people in Republican Party primaries to influence who got Republican nominations for various Senate seats, House of Representative seats, governorships, state legislative seats. So there were a number of races in the country where the Republicans put up far more conservative candidates in the general election than would have been the case had the Tea Party not had a presence in this election cycle. And in some cases, that was to the detriment of the Republicans. I could count at least 3, possibly 4 United States Senate seats that probably would have gone Republican, and perhaps the Republicans would have a majority in the Senate in the next Congress had the Tea Party not mobilized and pushed for far more conservative and, in those cases, unelectable candidates. Given the trending in the voting this election cycle, the Republicans easily should have won the Senate seats in Delaware, Colorado, Nevada,
Connecticut, maybe.
Connecticut, possibly.
California.
Possibly Alaska, Washington State. There were a number of states in which the Republicans had a real chance, or probably would have won, had the party merely nominated a mainstream conservative or moderate. And so I think the Tea Party in many cases actually cost the Republicans some very important races. Sarah Palin, as you point out, is a hero of the Tea Party movement. Quite possibly she will run for the Republican nomination for the presidency in 2012. If the Tea Party remains active up until that point, as I think it will, it can, yet again, have its biggest impact on intra-party politics on the Republican side. And it can effectively mobilize large numbers of people in relatively low turnout political party primary races. And if that happens, I could foresee a scenario where a candidate such as Sarah Palin, who is very, very controversial, but yet has intense support among Tea Party activists, could become a big factor or even possibly win the nomination in 2012. It's a very intriguing scenario.
We're nearing our wrap-up time. I want to thank Dr. Rozell for his comments, and I'm sure any of you can follow up with him in the coming moments, or follow up with him on email or phone call. And those of you online as well, we appreciate your presence with us. This again is the Rumi Forum, and we thank you for your presence.